But we're asking today this question as we search for answers to all these questions this week. How can you claim to have the only truth? How can Christians claim to have the only truth? I, as I said, grew up in Leicester, and about 5 or 10 minutes walk from where I grew up in Leicester, you could have gone to any of these buildings, a mosque, a synagogue, a temple, a church, and so forth. In fact, Leicester was the first city in Britain to have an ethnic majority. More people from a non-British background than from a British background live there. And that was a wonderful thing. My school was very ethnically diverse, and that was a very enriching experience. But it also raises the question of how can you claim in such a multicultural, multi-ethnic society to have the only religious truth? It might have been okay for someone to say that 50 years ago when really everyone around them probably shared their religious convictions. But how can you claim today in our culture, with globalization and everything else, to have the only truth? Isn't that really, really arrogant? And one of the problems that you might have had as you started to look into the Christian claim is that the Christian faith makes some very exclusive claims. And you're thinking, well, how can Christians claim such exclusive things? How could they claim to have the only truth or the only way to God? I was in a university recently and I was talking to a student after the talk, and this girl said to me, she said, I accept everyone, no matter who they are, no matter what they believe, so why can't God and why can't you? It's a good question, isn't it? And maybe you're here and you're saying, well, one of the things that really puts me off the Christian faith is that seems to be so arrogant. I could never consider it seriously. Or maybe you're saying, well, actually, I am intrigued by the Christian faith, but if I was to actually start following Jesus Christ, would I have to basically sign up to a system of thought that now makes me think that I'm better than everyone else? Do I have to now assume that everyone else is completely wrong if I'm going to follow Jesus Christ? And so it is popular in our society today to say, well, it really doesn't matter what you believe, provided you're sincere. It doesn't matter what you believe, because all beliefs are equally true, and if that's true for you, then that's okay. Now that's a popular view. Maybe that's what you hold yourself. But as we start this talk, it'd be worth actually just considering that view for a few moments. Firstly, I want to ask this question: what is the evidence for that belief? I use the term belief there actually quite deliberately, because it is a belief. If you say that all religions are equally true or equally valid, that is in itself a belief, isn't it? Certainly not a universal belief. There are lots of people in the world who don't believe that. And the question is also, is it true? What's the reason for believing that all beliefs are true? There was a debate between Alvin Plantinga, a Christian philosopher, and a religious pluralist, someone who holds that all religions are equally valid. And this religious pluralist said to Alvin Plantinga, if you were born in Morocco, you wouldn't be a Christian. And Alvin Plantinga turned back to this gentleman and said, and if you were born in Morocco, you probably wouldn't be a religious pluralist. You see, there are lots of people in the world that don't share this belief. So why should we think that we're right and they're wrong? Here's a second problem with this view, and that's that it ignores the very real differences between religious beliefs. I mean, you don't have to have studied comparative religion at Cambridge. You just need to have done RE at school to know that actually there are real differences between the religions in the world on the big questions of things like God, whether he exists, whether there are many gods or one. Someone put it this way. They said, the religions of the world are not fundamentally similar and only superficially different. But actually they're fundamentally different and only superficially similar. Now, of course, some people say, well, there is a way that you can reconcile these differences. One of the popular ways that, well, at least my religious education teacher liked to tell me about was the elephant illustration, which often comes out in such discussions. If you're not familiar with it, it basically goes like this. There's 4 blind men, they're feeding an elephant, and they're trying to work out what it is. One person feels its side and thinks it's a brick wall, one person feels its leg and thinks it's a tree trunk, one person feels its tail and thinks it's a rope, and will stop with the body parts. But they're all feeling different parts of the elephant, and they're all coming to different conclusions. And the illustration is given to say that's like religious beliefs. We're all grasping at ultimate reality, and we're all coming to different conclusions, but we're all basically grasping at the same elephants. It's a popular illustration, but there are, I'd suggest, at least 2 problems with it. The first is this. It's actually quite an arrogant illustration. You see, who is it in the illustration that can see the elephant? It's the person giving the illustration. So in other words, they're actually saying, I have seen what everyone else hasn't seen. I have grasped something of ultimate reality that all the religions in the world have failed to see. Very arrogant, isn't it? Second problem with it is that actually they were not all right, but actually they were all wrong, weren't they? Because it wasn't a tree or a rope or a brick wall, it was an elephant. So they were completely backing up the wrong end of the elephant, you might say. They were all wrong. And actually, that is worth thinking about, isn't it? The illustration isn't saying that all religions have basically got it right. They're all saying that they've got it completely and utterly wrong. Here's the third issue, and that is with the word tolerance. We hear a lot about tolerance. We hear that we live in a tolerant society. And actually, I want to say, I think that's a wonderful thing. I think tolerance is a good thing, and I think it's part of the legacy of the Judeo-Christian worldview of our society, that we live in a tolerant society that allows people to have different beliefs and convictions. I'm all for that. But tolerance actually assumes, doesn't it, that you disagree with someone. If I have a conversation with Anna this afternoon, if I agree with Anna, I don't have to tolerate her, I agree with her. It's when we disagree that I have to tolerate her. Thankfully, we don't have to tolerate each other very much. I normally agree with her. But tolerance assumes you disagree, right? Weirdly, in our culture, often we've redefined tolerance to mean not only do we allow each other to hold different opinions, the right to have that, but we've redefined it to mean we must say everyone is equally right. But actually, it assumes that we think people might potentially be wrong. And here's the fourth thing. You can't actually get away from exclusivity no matter how hard you try. It's just part of life. I mean, you all are students, I assume, at the University of Cambridge. The University of Cambridge is a very exclusive establishment, as you know. They don't let anyone come and study here. In fact, by the look of some of you, I'm not sure how... No, that would be rude. But they didn't, there were exams you had to pass, there were grades you had to get, and so forth. And truth is exclusive as well, isn't it? And I want to suggest all religious beliefs, and any belief about this, is exclusive. Let me try and explain. There are basically 4 beliefs you could have about religion. You could say, well, they're all right. Every single last one of them. You might say, no, they're not all right. Only some of them, maybe the major world religions. They're the ones that are right. Or you could say, well, actually, only one of them is right, and it's fill in the blanks, whatever it is for you. Or you could say, well, actually, I don't think any religion is right. I don't think there's a God. I think we live in a materialistic universe. They're all wrong. Now, often people say, isn't it arrogant of people in category number 3 to say, I have got the truth, and there is only one way? But actually, think about it, all of those claims are exclusive. Because if you're going to say that all religions are right, you're going to have to say that the people who say that some of them, one of them, and none of them are right are wrong. And if you say that only some of them are right, you're actually saying that the people who say that all of them, one of them, and none of them are right are wrong, and so on. You get the point? You see, whatever we say about religion, whatever kind of category we fall into, we are going to end up disagreeing with someone. It's possible to agree with everyone all of the time. And that's okay, because that's the nature of truth. And so I think it's maybe too simplistic to say, well, let's just say that all religions are the same. Let's just say they're all equally valid. Because I don't think it works. Now, you might say, well, what should I do in the light of that? Well, I guess there's 3 options. The first option is you could say, well, I'm going to give up. I'm not going to bother looking at any religious claims. I haven't got the time. I'm too busy. And, I'm not interested. I think that would be a mistake, though. Because I think, actually, beliefs do have implications, don't they? Gosh, we've seen that recently. And so actually thinking through beliefs and the basis to beliefs is important, on a personal basis as well as a global basis. So I think it's important to look into. The second option, of course, is therefore you could say, well, I'm going to study all religious beliefs in the world, and I'm going to come to a conclusion after studying them all about which one I'm going to follow. Now again, I've got nothing against you doing that, okay? If Christianity is worth following, I'd suggest it's worth following in the light of studying every belief system in the world, not simply because you haven't. But there is a practical problem with that, and it's this. If you're going to wait until you've studied every religious claim in the world before you adopt any convictions about one of them, then you're going to have to wait a long time, aren't you? Because that's going to take a long time. There are lots of religious beliefs. So there's a third option, and the third option is this. You could say, well, okay, I'm going to start with the claims of Christianity. Now you're sitting there thinking, I knew the speaker would say that because he's a Christian, he's been invited by the Christian Union, and so, okay, I admit it, I am biased, okay? I have vested interest in why I might, but I also want to give you 3 reasons why I think starting with the claims, particularly the claims of Jesus Christ, is a really good place to start. Okay? Why start with the claims of Jesus Christ in this investigation? Firstly, because he's unique in the way you can investigate him. We mentioned this a little bit in the Q&A yesterday for those who stayed. We asked the question, how do you know whether a religious belief is true? It's a good question, but actually it's often a difficult question to ask. Because if a religious belief is at its centre a system of philosophy or morality, it's quite hard to objectively say it's true or it's false, isn't it? You might say, well, I like it, or I don't like it, it works for me or it doesn't work for me, but to say that is objectively true is a difficult thing to do. I mean, take for instance the claims of Buddhism. You might look at the teaching of Buddhism and say, well, I think I like that, I think I'll adopt that, I think that works. So you might say, I don't think it works, I don't adopt that. But actually to ask objectively, is there a way in which I could say, is it true? You know, whether or not the Buddha lived wouldn't change, in one sense, the philosophy of Buddhism. Again, with the claims of Islam, you know, the claim that Muhammad received the words of Allah and we have them now, the miracle of say, how do I know that actually that happened? I can read the Quran and say, I think it's a beautiful book and I think it is God's word, or I might read it and say, I don't think it is. But how would I know objectively? It's very hard to verify because in one sense it's not possible to falsify it. But I'd say with the claims of Christianity, we do have something unique because Christianity is not just at heart a system of philosophy or morality. It's an event. It centres on the life, the death, and importantly, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the foundation stone that undergirds it all. And if that happened, then it's important. And if it didn't happen, then the whole thing is rubbish and we should close down the Christian Union and we should sell our churches to someone else. But it's not just an idea or a teaching, it's an event that lies at the heart of it, an event that you can investigate and look into for yourself. If you want to do that, by the way, on the bookstall as you head out, there's a really good book written by a good friend of mine, a New Testament scholar, and someone who's looked into this historical evidence over a lifetime now, Michael Green, and it's called Jesus for Skeptics. And that would really help you, particularly there a chapter on the resurrection. Take it away. It's free to you if you're our guest today. So firstly, it's unique in the way you can investigate it. But secondly, I'd say look at Jesus because he's unique in what he claims about himself. See, this is the staggering thing about the Christian faith, that right throughout history, from the 21st century right back to the 1st century, Christians have claimed that in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, God himself was stepping into and had broken into human history. That God hadn't just sent a prophet or a teacher, but God himself had turned up in person. I know some people say, well, that idea evolved in the 4th century or the 5th century, but actually I think we've got many good reasons to suggest it didn't. Not just the overwhelming evidence of the New Testament that we talked about yesterday, but other clues too. I'll give you one of them. This is only one. This is a little bit of graffiti, Christian graffiti. Well, actually anti-Christian graffiti, as I'll explain. It was found in Rome, dates from between the 1st and the 3rd century AD. It's more clearly portrayed on the right-hand side there, but the original is there on the left. And it's a picture of a person being crucified with a donkey's head, and then to its left, a man raising his hand, presumably in worship, and an inscription underneath that says, Alexamenos worships his God. It was clearly a bit of kind of derision targeted towards Christians. But it's fascinating because it shows us that even the enemies of Christianity, within possibly 100 or 200 years, clearly knew that Christians worshipped a man who was crucified, who they claimed was God. In fact, it's quite fascinating that nearby someone else scribbled, Alexamenos is faithful. Maybe a Christian who had kind of broken in and wanted to get his own back, I don't know. But this news that Christians were worshipping a man who had died on a cross at the hands of the Romans, who they also believed was God, had spread like wildfire. Now why, the question is, why on earth did strict monotheistic Jews, who were perhaps the most unlikely people in all of history to start believing this stuff, why did they believe it? And I would suggest it's because over time they became convinced, as they looked at Jesus' life, as they heard Jesus' teaching, Jesus was who he was claiming to be. They'd heard his claims. Jesus had claimed to be one with God. He claimed to reveal God. He said that if you had seen him, you had seen God. He claims the name of God in the Old Testament, the I am, and he referred to himself by that. He claimed to forgive people's sins, something that upset the religious leaders because they thought that only God could do it. And he accepted people's worship. In fact, not just accepted people's worship, but rebuked them for not doing it sooner. Now you might say, well, anyone could make outstanding claims, and that's true, isn't it? I mean, I could walk into Cambridge this afternoon with a big billboard on me saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to God except through me. And you would think I was an idiot. And I would be, okay? I could make those claims, but to back them up and to get people to believe me would be another matter. And the astounding thing is that Jesus not only made the claims, but then backed it up again and again through the incredible things he did, but most of all, through his own resurrection, the event that vindicated the claims that he'd been making through his life. Now, listen, maybe you're saying, well, I'm not sure I believe that yet, but hey, just listen to this. If this is true, if that claim was true, that would mean that there is something unique about Jesus Christ that is worth checking out, isn't it? That is different to any other claim that any other religious leader has made through history. He's unique in what he claims about himself. And here's the third and final thing. Check out Jesus because he's unique in what he offers. You see, some of us are not religious here. And the reason maybe why you're not religious is you have an issue with religion, because we kind of figure we know how religion works. Religion is about what you do. It's a system of morality and behavior. And if you basically do the right things and keep the right rules, then you are in, and God accepts you. And one day you'll go to heaven or paradise or be reincarnated to something nice or whatever. But of course, if you don't keep the rules or if you're not good, then you won't be in, and you won't go to that place, and you'll go to somewhere worse. And so we basically think it's about what I do, which could lead to two things, couldn't it? Firstly, it could lead to pride and arrogance. I could walk around saying, well, the reason why God loves me and I'm going to heaven is because I'm better than you. Or I could say, well, actually, I'm not better than you. I look at my life and I see that there's lots that's wrong. And then it's not going to lead to pride, but it will lead to despair. I'll look at my life and say, well, there's no hope for me. And I'll be always morbidly looking in at my own failures and mistakes. And that's why sometimes we don't like the idea of religion. But what I will also say is this, that idea of, well, some people call it karma, you get what you deserve, is totally turned on its head by Jesus. Because Jesus says the way to be accepted by God is not through what we do, but through what he's done. Jesus says, I haven't come to be served. He said, but I've come to serve. He says, actually, the way to be accepted by God is not through your own moral behavior. You'd never be good enough. But it's through what I've done. Through the life that I lived for you, and in particular, through the death that I died for you. He says, actually, through my life and ultimately through my death, I will take upon myself what you deserve, our separation from God, now and ultimately. And I'll give you what you don't deserve, a relationship God now and eternally. He says, that's what I want to give you. It's not karma, the Christian word is grace. It's a beautiful thing. It says that we can get what we don't deserve. I remember being in Serbia last year and chatting to a guy about this. And he said to me, this is the most wonderful news I've heard. Throughout my life, I've thought that I've had to earn God's acceptance through what I've done. And I've always been aware that I've failed. He says, but you're telling me that actually it's not through what I do, but it's through what Jesus has done. He said, this changes everything. And it does. This concept of grace is so beautiful. Listen to what Bono said. He said this. In fact, he's got an interesting song called Grace. But he said this about grace. He said, I'd be in trouble if karma was going to be my judge. It doesn't excuse my mistakes, but I'm holding out for grace. I'm holding out that Jesus took my sins onto the cross because I know who I am, and I hope I don't have to depend on my own religiosity. This grace is a beautiful, beautiful thing that Jesus offers to each one of us. And can I say, if this is true, Actually, again, this makes a big difference, because if religion leads to pride or despair, what does grace lead to? It should lead to the opposites. Not pride, but firstly humility. See, what's the first step to becoming a Christian? Not to say, I'm better than everyone else, I'm in, but to say, actually, I'm no better than anyone else. I need forgiveness. So it should lead to humility, not pride, but it should lead to joy, not despair, because I can say, look, I know my life is not what it should be. I know I've failed and I've messed up. But I know there's a God who loves me and accepts me, not because of what I've done, but because of what he's done for me. Not pride or despair, but grace and humility is what the Christian faith should lead to. I'll tell you about a friend of mine back home. We went out for a meal a while back. He's not a Christian, and we chat often about Christian things. And he's got quite a few objections and questions. And one day he said to me, he said, Michael, Christians, they're just so arrogant. They think they're better than everyone else. They think they've got the truth and no one else has. They think they're so arrogant. And I said to him, I said, look, I'm a Christian. Do you think I'm like that? He said, no. Now, he had to say that because I was going to buy the lunch. So I thought, better push this a bit further. So I said, look, your wife, she's a Christian. Do you think she's like that? And he said, well, no. And he thought, well, I was going to tell her if he said yes. So again, I pushed it a bit further. I said, look, you've got lots of friends here who are Christians. I named some of them. Do you think any of them are like that? And he said, well, actually, no. And I said, look, why do you reject Christianity on the basis of a presupposition that hasn't been borne out by the reality of your experience? Yeah, that hasn't been your experience, has it? And yet so often it's easy to say, oh, Christians are this or Christians are that. If that's what you're thinking, can I encourage you to check out some of the Christians here in Cambridge, okay? Not just the good-looking ones. I mean, check them all out, okay? And ask yourself the question, this belief that they have in Jesus, does it turn them into arrogant so-and-sos or something else? Because actually it shouldn't be. And if you're saying, oh, this is so exclusive, can I just say this as we finish? In one sense, the Christian claims are exclusive, but in another sense, they're wonderfully inclusive. Because Jesus says, anyone. I wonder if you know today where the Christian church is growing most rapidly in the world. It's not in Britain or in America, it's in Afghanistan and Iran. The Christian faith isn't bound to white, Western, middle-class society because it's not based on culture or anything like that. It's based upon a person, Jesus Christ. And that offer is available to anyone. And if it's available to anyone, the good news is it's available to us. And the only thing that will cause us to be excluded will be ourselves if we choose to reject it. But we don't have to. And Jesus says, I offer it to you free of charge. It's great news.